Hello, friends. Welcome back to my booktube. Today, I'll use normal editing skills like a person who has their life together. If you haven't seen any of my amazing content before, I say completely ironically, I'm Jamie, and I am trying. So this is my February review, my book in review type video. Follow up immediately to my February TBR video that I did. And it may not surprise you to realize that I didn't finish all the books on that because I had 15 books on that. But that's not for nothing, because here's the thing, I probably could have done it. But I ended up reading books that weren't on there, that I had to read for school, and I had as Kindle, so it's fine. Uh, and I'll get to those ones next time, the ones that I am going to have to retroactively incorporate into March are The Grey House. I believe it's The Name of All Things. Yeah, it's on my shelf. Master of One, and I'm in the middle of Bone Shard Daughter, so I do not think it is fair to include it in this because February is almost over, and I may not finish that one in time, and that's fine. So I'm just gonna go chronologically. I know some people will group it by the rating that they gave it, oh, I'll do all the 1 stars first. I don't know, maybe that's too complex for me, but I am going to try very hard to have the titles pop up here because some of the books, again, I don't have a physical copy for, and I also did sell some of the ones that I had physical copies for because I was so middle of the road, so underwhelmed or annoyed, and there's a used bookstore a block away from me, so I was just well, money please, and they gave me $12 in store credit. But yeah, I'll get to those when I get to them. But first, I guess I'll just jump right in. This one's kind of cheating because I finished it in February, but I did start it on the last day of January, but whatever. And that is Cat Sebastian's Two Rogues Make a Right, as part of her Seducing the Sedgwicks series. It's a romance novel, it's historical romance, and this is probably my number one. I don't even want to say guilty because I do not feel guilty for enjoying these. These are kind of the niche of romance that I've found myself in, is historical gay romance that they definitely have the happily ever after guarantee on them. I don't want anything bad to happen. All of her stuff is just kind of a little bit formulaic in the way that romance typically is, but I find that genuinely comforting. And I rated this 5 stars because I actually really love her books. This one, it follows the brother of the character in the previous book, which I believe is A Gentleman Never Keeps Score, and his childhood friend, and their relationship. It's kind of a little bit tempestuous. They have a lot of self-esteem issues to get through, and at the beginning they're just kind of we're friends, but we could be something else if either of us were willing to speak up about it and communicate about our issues. And they do communicate about their issues, and it has a happy ending. So that's all I want. And the next one I also rated 5 stars. This might be a theme. I tend to rate fairly high just because I write stuff, and I don't know. Sometimes to me, giving any rating under 3 feels like I wouldn't want to see that, but I also know it has to happen. Everything is subjective, and yeah, but I digress. The next book is The Black Veins by Ashia Monet. That was the first book I talked about in my my TBR video, and I really loved it. 5 stars. It's a YA where the characters, to me at any rate, genuinely felt like teens, which is something that's kind of difficult to quantify, but what I mean is that it was they didn't feel like an adult pretending to be a teen. hello fellow kids style. It just had an air of authenticity about it that's like, yeah, that's how teens talk. It had a really fun and diverse cast. It was focused primarily on the main character Blythe, whose family kind of gets kidnapped by this magical government, and she is kind of implicated in these government's politics because she was given all these powers as a kid, to like safeguard them from the leaders of these governments. They just like chose a bunch of kids who they thought would be like good stewards of this energy as they grew older, and so she has to go find these other people and like do this whole road trip thing and save everybody and try to stop like a war from happening. And I really enjoyed it. There was a lot of not just uh, like BIPOC themes, but there was also like LGBT characters. So I really liked that, even though it wasn't, as the last book was, like a romance book with a romance arc. Like, it's still important to me that those characters are there, that those identities are visible. And yeah, I did give it 5 stars. The only things that I was kind of like hesitated from being like totally perfect was that like there were a few typos, and like usually with a place name, and that's like the only reason why I noticed it is because I was like, wasn't this spelled differently a few chapters ago? But again, that is like so under the radar, it like does not even matter. And then like the simple fact that it's a road trip story, and I fucking love road trip stories because of the amount of like weird liminal space you kind of get into. But I like wish that the characters had more time to fool around, and they didn't really, but it made sense because they were like on the run from like all these monsters and like dangerous magicians and stuff. They wouldn't have time to like go hang out at the Wawa. And then the next book, also excellent, A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martin. um what can I even say about this? It's a space opera. It follows a woman who's an ambassador from a small like station, like a space station type civilization that just floats like in contained in its own little thing, and she has to go to the heart of this like neighboring empire, and kind of be their ambassador in politics. But she doesn't realize until she gets there that the man that she's been sent to replace was probably murdered, and like she might totally be next. She has no idea why. And what I really loved, like probably overall about this, is that like I know this author was a history major. Like, I know, because there's a type of writing that only history majors are really dig ourselves into, and it's trying to just fill out a culture, like just create so many little things, like not even necessarily borrowing from our world, just trying to create as many like little details about this new thing as you can to fill it. And this world was filled. I mean, it was like there was so much culture and like bits about architecture and things about the way people talk to each other and like what kind of facial expressions are okay in this society. And I really loved that attention. It just felt like I was slurping it up like a vacuum going through it. It ruled. Um, and there's also a sapphic like couple. There's 2 characters in it that there's some attraction there, and it's really nice. And it just like it's part of this world, is part of this story. Again, love to see it play out and just be visible there. The next book I read, again, not on my TBR. It was just like I saw it. I saw a coupon, I think, for it on Twitter, and I was like, hey, I want to read that. And it's a short story collection, A Phoenix First Must Burn by Patrice Caldwell. Well, not by, but edited by, and has a whole bunch of other stories. And this was so cool because all of the stories had black female protagonists, and I like, it's Black History Month, and I just thought it was really neat. Usually, short story collections, they're so hit or miss for me because one, story that annoys me will make me not like the rest of them. This one, really, all the stories were pretty strong. I can remember a lot of the action, the emotional ties to all of them, what made all the stories and all the characters different, and just loved to see it. It got a 4 out of 5 stars. I think just because some of the stories I was like they were not bad or even mediocre, but I just was not deeply grounded in them as some of the other ones. And I think something that may have contributed to that was the length of these stories is okay, obviously you have a short story collection. They're all going to be, you're trying to fit them all in one book. Maybe they can't be as long or have as much exposition as you want in them. So, some of them ended kind of quickly, and I was like, well, what happened? I want to know. Well, what are you what am I going to do now? But this next book I read for school, and that book I had to read for a class on Eastern European history. This was our first assignment of the year to kind of give a profile of the sort of topics that we would be talking about. And it's The Bridge on the Drina, or I've heard it The Bridge on the River Drina, by Ivo Andrić. I believe that is how you pronounce his name, but I've never heard anybody say it out loud. So I could totally be misled on that one. And it is about a bridge. It has no main character. It's just straight up about this bridge that connects these two halves of a town over the River Drina, and the really long span of time that the bridge is there, and all the different things that happened on it. And I rated this 5 stars, because I appreciated its craft. That sounds extremely pretentious, but I really believe that the way that this was done was so masterful. To not have a main character and to just have time passing, the flow of water under the bridge, was really compelling to me, and all of the different little stories that were incorporated on and around it. And it was such a grim book as well. And I guess it's a little violent, so maybe skip ahead if you don't want to hear this part. Okay, have you skipped ahead? Okay, maybe 30 seconds? Okay. There's a very, very, very graphic scene where somebody tries to sabotage the building of the bridge, and this person does get, Vlad the Impaler style staked. And it's in excruciating detail, and I did not even know that was how they did that. I thought it was kind of a different way. I'm not even gonna explain how they did it, but it was so raw and nasty. Okay, I'm done talking about it. So yeah, if you've skipped ahead 30 seconds, then we're here and we're moving on. But it was just such a masterfully executed book, and it made me really understand a lot of things about Bosnia and Serbia and that whole area that I didn't really know that much about before. The next book is The House of the Dead by Dostoevsky. He needs no introduction. It was, again, like the last book I mentioned, pretty brutal. Did not read this for school, read this for fun because I suck. And it was just about kind of the quasi-autobiographical narrative of a man who gets into prison in Siberia, and the ways that he remembers that, and the different things that stuck out to him. And it's, of course, kind of drawn on Dostoevsky's own experience getting exiled. And it was just very poignant to me, I think, in a lot of ways. There's lines in here about hope and what hope does to somebody that's experiencing a really abject condition, and how there are these people there who were, maybe they don't even know why they're there in this place, in this prison, and they're, but they stay alive and they keep hopeful because to some extent, I think the quote is if you have 1,000 days ahead of you and every day is really difficult, and then you go to sleep and you wake up, then you get to have only 999 days ahead of you, and that's what keeps these people going. And I thought that was a really really powerful message from this. It's not one of the most popular Dostoevsky books out there, Definitely would have to go to Crime and Punishment, and the brothers Karamazov, and all of those guys. But yeah, definitely, probably now my second favorite thing that he's written. And that has to take second place under the Brothers K. 5 stars again to my next book. This book is one that I actually heard about through Reading Glasses podcast. If anybody listens to that who's watching this, definitely found a lot of really interesting recommendations from like them talking about what they're reading. So that's really good. And that is How Much of These Hills is Gold by C. Pam Zhang. But yeah, this is a tough one. I rated this 5 stars because I felt like it was a challenging book in a lot of ways because it's so brutal. And it's so brutal in a way that's like clearly very earnest. It's a book about the California gold rush and about different ways that immigrants in California during that time had, their livelihoods, and it kind of moves back and forth between different time periods. There are these, parents who came from mainland China, and then it goes to their children. That whole like generational relationship, I think, is really fraught in this story. But it's also, the story about Chinese immigrants in California to begin with, like their relationship to the people around them, and like obviously the enormous prejudice and cruelty that they faced. But it's also a really, really beautifully written story. The prose is so packed with figurative language, with like metaphor. But definitely, it felt really, really densely packed with information, and so many like themes about history and community that I don't really have the time to get into. Initially, I did hit a point where I was not. I thought for a second, I don't know if I want to keep reading this though, and here's why. Like, hear me out. I think you should still read it. I think this is again, like so many of the other things, a necessary thing that has to be written. But one of the characters, one of the child characters, so there's two kids, Lucy and Sam. And Sam, for the first 3 chapters, we get, narration comes through, mediated through Lucy. So she's like, oh, Sam, my brother, like he's done, like he's doing this, like he's always been like blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. And then abruptly at like chapter 4, there's this paragraph that's like, and Lucy is like, oh, now that he's dead, you don't have to pretend to be a boy anymore. And I was like, what is happening here? And then immediately started referring to this character who up until that point had been referred to with male pronouns, and like everything as, like, oh, my sister, and like she. And I was like, what is going on here? Because I've seen before like stuff that treats historical, like, again, like I don't need to necessarily diagnose people in the past as being transgender. Like, it's a obviously really complicated question of like identity and like what they would have even thought of themselves, but there's still so much like fraught energy around like insinuating like, oh, there are no trans people in the past. So I was like, is it going to be one of these again? And it was pretty uncomfortable for a chapter there. Like, I was like, wow, are they really going to do this to this character? And then I kind of noticed like the author was making a really obvious choice, like in the narration, not from Lucy's point of view, to only refer to Sam by their name. And then I was like, okay, maybe this isn't like, I don't know what to think. And then I just looked up the book and the author, and there was an interview about it where she talked about it, and I was like, oh, okay, so clearly this isn't made in ill intent, and it is trying to explore these issues of like what transness and gender was during that time period, like 1850s or whatever. So I did push through it, and eventually by the end I was like, yeah, okay, I get it. Like, it's fine. It's obviously difficult to speak about that stuff in the past. And I know because I try to write on that stuff in the past all the time. I do Russian history, and I've tried to write about the identity and like whatever that means, and like did they even have words to describe themselves and things like that. So yeah, definitely a very very fraught book, a very challenging book in a lot of ways. Like so many trigger warnings, but I think it is a really really good and impactful and powerful book. um, the next book I read, I only gave 3 stars, and that is The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel, the author of Station 11, which I loved. And this one was like, okay. I really hate to say it. Like, I hate to, like, again, hate to give books only 3 stars, or less than that, but it happens all the time. The Glass Hotel. What can I say about it? It was about like what it means to be rich, and like there was a character who owns like a Ponzi scheme, some kind of like money laundering thing, and all the different people who are like impacted by it, and something about ghosts was in there. But to be honest with you, I don't like understand where the ghost narrative and like the financial crime narrative were supposed to intersect, because it just kind of was happening. It was just one of those books where things happen, and again, it wasn't poorly written. It was her style. It was fine. I liked some of the things that were written in it, and some of the prose choices, and like some of the lines. Like there's a line where one of the characters who works at this firm says like it's possible to know and not know something, like when he's being questioned about why he went along with it. Um, and I liked some of those themes, but I just kind of didn't get it. Like it didn't like I wouldn't rave about it. I wouldn't hoot and holler about it. It was fine, so it gets 3 stars. And the next one, back to 5, because I have no restraint, apparently. That would be The Time of Contempt, the second Witcher book. Quite honestly, aside from the short story, The Last Wish, this was the best one. The best Witcher book that I've read so far. I think I rated the first book, The Blood of Elves, pretty highly, but this one I do think really knocked it out of the park. It had a lot more like narrative cohesion to it, and just different. All the different characters were there and present and doing their own thing. We got to have kind of a Geralt and Yennefer moment, which is like, okay, forgive me, I like heterosexual things sometimes, okay? And Ciri had her own like big arc at the end, like trying to survive from this desert that she kind of got dropped into. I feel like I'm just not explaining The Witcher right now. I'm just explaining things that happen. But basically, yeah, I can't assume that you guys all know what The Witcher is about. But the Witcher series is a popular Polish fantasy series. Follows Geralt, who's the Witcher. He's kind of like this monster hunter, who gets paid to dispatch monsters. And Ciri, who is kind of like this child of destiny, like she has this curse or blessing, depending on how you look at it, of elder blood, which is this thing that makes her like really, really magically powerful, and everybody wants to like kind of get their hands on her and don't like want to let her have her autonomy. They all have ideas about what to do with her and like to use this power, and you know I really like her relationship with Gerald, as like Gerald's kind of looking after her, like a little bit, of a father figure, and Yennefer, the sorceress, is kind of like a little bit of a mother figure there. It's a very interesting found family dynamic, and I really loved the way it was done in this installment. I listened to on audiobook The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman, because my hold from the library came off of it. I gave that 4 stars, and mostly because Neil Gaiman read the audiobook, and I didn't even know that until I started it. But I really think that having the author's voice kind of try to imbue these characters and situations with life, like, yeah, that works. That works really well. Um, it's kind of this little, I would say, novella about this man trying to remember some very, very weird neighbors he once had. And it's kind of dark. It went in like a Lovecraftian dimension almost, like with these extra dimensional like spatial forces that are like trying to meddle in the world. And it was told like through the perspective of an adult remembering a child's memories, but it didn't come off as being like too clumsy. Like there wasn't too much adult in it. Like it really felt like, oh, this is like, this must really be like what this kid was feeling and stuff like that. So I liked that. The only book that I rated less than 3 stars this month was A Big Ship at the Edge of the Universe by Alex White, and I gave that 2 stars. Initially, I gave it 3, and then I looked back at The Glass Hotel, and I was like, there's no way these are on the same level. Like, you're telling, like, no way would I say that The Glass Hotel, as mediocre as some of it was, is on the same level as this, which annoyed me. So I gave it a demerit, and I booted it down onto the next tier. This story, I really love the concept. Like, I'm gonna be honest, the concept is so choice. There's, this ghost ship that's skirted like the edges of the universe. Obviously, it's like a super weapon, and you have this woman who's kind of a washed up treasure hunter who wants to find it. And then you have this other woman who's like a race car driver, but like a magic race car driver, and they kind of get pushed together and forced to go on this journey to locate the ship and you know maybe stop other forces from having it. Concept great, love that. Uh, it was such a mess. I mean, that sounds so hypercritical, but really by the end of it, I was just like trying desperately to digest it and like keep pushing through, because it has this kind of like, and I'm not saying this is a terrible thing. The world building has like a weird combination of sci-fi and fantasy, and that's fine. If you want to have magic in space, whatever, there's nobody saying you have to not have magic if you do space. But none of it was explained. And not even in a fun way where, like, I still loved the characters in the end. Like, Nine Fox Gambit by Yoon Lee, one of my favorite books of all time. Nothing gets explained in Nine Fox Gambit, almost ever. You just kind of have to wade through it and make of it what you will. But things come back, is the thing about Nine Fox Gambit. You will hear certain words again and again, and then, like, from context clues, you can probably put together what's happening. But in this, stuff just never comes back. It's like you hear these words, and it's like, what even is that? And do I need to allocate brain space for this? I don't know. When is this ever going to be relevant to me ever again? You have, like, and there's just so many strange details that like weren't interesting details, to the point where it kind of felt like reading stereo instructions. Just like a lot of numbers, a lot of things shoved into a small space, and I was like so baffled. And then on the level of characterization, like, I liked the race car driver at first, and I liked the treasure hunter at first. In the first couple of chapters, I was like willing to give these people a chance, but by the end, the treasure hunter had really started to annoy me, because every successive thing that we find out about her does not even like deepen her personality. It just makes her kind of grating to hear about. Yeah. And then the other character like does not grow or change very much. Like, things happen to her, but we do not see her react fundamentally. Like, her worldview isn't, that shaken, until suddenly, randomly, at the end, she's like expressing all of these, kind of grim sentiments about like, oh, like fame isn't worth it, like, and stuff like that. And I'm like, well, who is this compared to the person you were, I don't know, 10 pages ago? I don't want to completely shit on it. The reason why I got 2 stars is because I really, really liked one of the side characters, who, like, kind of saved me from just putting this book down immediately. She comes in I don't know, a few chapters in, like solidly into the meat of the book, and she's like a mercenary on this ship, and she has like a mechanistic robot that is like sentient, but she can get inside of it, and it like understands her voice and stuff, and like she fights alongside it, and it's like a human-sized armor shell that just follows her around, and I just thought that was so cool. And like her personality really shone out. Like it was so strange to read her lines next to other characters that I was like, man, come on. Like, are we doing cardboard cutouts or are we gonna do this? But yeah, she did keep me from putting that book down forever until I did put it down forever when I left it at the used bookstore, and somebody else will have to experience that. But oh, and one last thing about it, that there are a lot of other nitpicky things I could do about it, but we don't want to be here all day, do we? Um, was that some of the lines and some of the plot beats were straight up pulled from anime, and not even anime that I've ever seen. It was things I remembered from like watching tons of Watch Mojo compilations of like 10 cool anime moments you will never forget. And I kind of didn't forget about them, obviously, but there was so many scenes and beats, and like to some extent even characters' names, that I was like, where have I heard that before? And it was definitely from anime. And especially, like, there's a scene toward the end that I think is straight up pulled from Code Geass. Like, it's really almost the same line, and the same thing happens. And, like, yeah. And it's just kind of shoved in there, and I was like, who Boise does this author... Like, either this is the wildest coincidence on Earth, I don't know. I don't know what to say, but I'm not, I'm not going to sit here and whack the author with my plagiarism stick or anything. The next book I read, second to last, we're almost done, is New York 2140 by Kim Stanley Robinson. And instead of explaining like my precise thoughts on this, because I don't really care to, because it was kind of a blah, I'm just going to read aloud the review that I wrote of it while slightly drunk. Would have slapped if it was just the Citizen and Stefan and Roberto chapters. Some of the prose was gorgeous, but ultimately I was too annoyed by one of the characters' presence and the non-existence of the abduction plotline to really get hooked. It was so leftist in, like, a rural liberal way. This book felt like a return shot to Neal Stephenson's weird libertarianism, except it was not nearly as fun or weird as Neal Stephenson at his worst. Amelia was pretty okay. I guess what I'm saying is, for a book trying to come off as vaguely communist, it was nowhere near communist enough. The bizarre pro-police message threw me, as did all the wacky jumps in other countries and the complete lack of LGBT people in this New York effing city. You guys can keep this dude, I'm going back to the Baroque cycle. So I did just name drop a lot of random characters, but ultimately they don't matter, because there was only like 3 or 4 characters that were, likable, that I kind of wanted to see where their arcs ended up, and ultimately there was kind of a non-plot. Like, there was just a non-plot. It was like, you have this plot line where 2 of the characters get abducted at the beginning, and they're like trying to figure out who did it, but then it kind of like doesn't go anywhere. It just disappears by the end, because you have like this kind of weird Deus Ex Machina moment where everything is fixed. But then there's some chapters that are like called The Citizen. It's totally removed from the characters. It's just about New York City, and like quotes about New York City, and like describing why different things in the city are this way, and like really lovely and metaphorical. And like, if the book was literally only those chapters just talking about New York, I would have been like, hey, that's good. But it wasn't. We had to hear about this annoying stockbroker and like have him explain what hedge funds are to me, and I'm like, I know what a hedge fund is, moron, shut up. The last book that I read in the month of February, finally, is The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead, which I just finished listening to on audiobook about an hour ago. And I gave that 4 stars. And it was again like How Much of These Hills is Gold, a really fraught book, but again, a necessary book. Like, these subjects are like painful, I think, but they do have to be written about. And this book follows 2 boys who are sent to a reform school in Florida during the Jim Crow era. They're both black, and this school is like segregated, and all of the teachers there are like horrible and violent. And it's just like, it goes back and forth of these different chapters between like one character in the future, like trying to remember things about this school and like try to move on and cope with his life, and like chapters that are set at the school and like really in the moment, dissecting like all of the horrible things that happen there. And there's a twist at the end that I'm gonna admit it, sometimes I see twists coming, but I did not see this coming until like a few sentences before it happened, and I was like, hold on a second, are they really going to do this? And they did it. And that's the end of that. But I am going to have to do a March TBR soon, so we can embark on that one. And yeah, well, thank you for watching this. Let's hope I can cut it down to a reasonable length and manage to make all of the book covers appear in this video, or else you won't see it. So yeah, just thank you for that, and check out all the things in the description, because I'm going to try to link everything pretty reliably, including Reading Glasses podcast. I will link in there, and please enjoy the rest of your life.